Tour Stop 4 is Ash Site Conversions, and it's presented by Steve Kaufman, DNR Forest Ranger at O'Connell Falls, and also the nominating forester for Ross's Award, and Dan Huff, the local NRCS conservationist. Information covered at this tour stop will be the pre-salvage of ash before emerald ash borer on 2 different sites, and then the replanting of those 2 sites, one being a swamp site and the other being a wet mesic upland site.
All right, so this is a site that Ross had harvested in, I don't know the year, but it was probably 2022, I'm guessing the same as what that site was over there. They had all the ash cut out of this site here. So in preparation of emerald ash borer, had all the ash cut out. There's some other species growing with it as well. He cut everything in here besides the one wild apple tree growing. This is kind of a wet mesic site. So as you look through here, it's not like the next site we're going to. You know, elevation wise, we're several feet above where that swamp is. But you know, you might get a clay pan underneath where water just holds here, doesn't drain very well, so it's kind of wet, undulating throughout here. He planted this site to swamp white oak using these vented tree tubes and then white pine nurse trees. So the goal of the white pine trees are just to grow with these swamp white oak as they get older, and then shade their lower branches at some point, so you grow nice saw logs here. So, you know, from a forestry perspective, just replanting the site is a win, but with Ross, he always wants to do things best possible, and so he's trying to grow, you know, good saw logs in addition to reforesting the site. That's really good for wildlife and that as well. He did those species because they're well adapted to this site. This site is one of the 3 University of Minnesota climate change research plots on this property here that he has. And so they're kind of seeing how swamp white oak does on this site. We're at the northern range of swamp white oak. This area here and to the south, it's not real common. River bottoms here and there. Bur oak is the most common similar species we have around here. So they're kind of testing out to see how it does long term. You know, a small amount of time won't give us a good idea, but as we get 20, 30 years on the road, it'll be a lot better idea how they do. When you're looking at what species to plant here, specifically ash stands, is looking at, is it going to be a good species, spot for swamp white oak? And one thing we look at is what kind of species is it? The black ash, green ash. If it's a green ash site, it's a very good chance it's going to do really well with swamp white oak, because the pH range that they grow in is pretty much the same. When we get to black ash sites, black ash can grow at a pH that's quite a bit lower than swamp white oak. So some black ash sites will be great for swamp white oak, and some may not be. So those are some things that we're looking at.
So what pHs are we talking about?
So swamp white oak goes down to about 5.5, somewhere in there, and actually 5 and a little bit lower. And black ash will go down to like 4.2, somewhere at that point. Which, as you know, with pH, as you get further away, that's a bigger difference. So they're relatively close, but that black ash will go further.
So you should take the pH of your site before you decide.
You certainly could. You certainly could. If you want to be, if you're going to put a large investment into it, that would be worthwhile to try to make sure that you're in that right range. But if you're looking at a black ash site and it's got a variety of other species in it, you're going to be good. You know, so you're looking at, if you get a monoculture of that, and same with like black spruce, those 2 go to real low pHs, and you just want to kind of watch that. The one reason why swamp white oak is so highly recommended for planting the sites, it's got a lot of things to make it advantageous. One, it is relatively shade tolerant compared to the rest of the oaks, and it fights against competition better than most other oaks as well. And that shade tolerance is part of that. So if it's growing against brush, if it's growing against, you know, a thick layer of broadleaves and grasses, that it can push up through better than other species. The deer don't like browsing as much as other oak species. In an area like this, where you have the deer numbers he has on his property, they'll still obliterate all the oaky plants here. That's why he's got to do caging. But if you have an area where you have a little bit less deer, or an area they don't use as much, you might be able to get by without protection. Area like this, I don't think you'd have a lot of chance. The browse is pretty significant here. And then it also regenerates better than most trees as well. So if this site, the next site's gonna be tamarack. If we put tamarack in this site here, they would thrive. They would grow really fast. They would do great. But then when you get to regenerating that site again, tamarack is very poor at regenerating unless you have a disturbed site or if you have like a bog type setting. But in here, seed origin tamarack, you're gonna be hard to get that when you get a thick layer in the ground. Swamp white oaks at a big acorn puts on a big taproot and can grow really well in those conditions. Again, with that little bit more tolerance of deer browse and other species, if these oaks live for 100 years, at some point there you're going to get a period where you're going to get some past the deer and you're going to be able to start getting some swamp white oak started. And you see that in other areas. When we work some of the river bottom country, Outagamie County, Shadow County, some of those areas that have a lot of deer, when you have those, maybe just a few swamp white oaks, you'd be surprised how much natural regen you're going to have in those areas. Bur oak kind of has a similar characteristic, but that's why swamp white oak you'll hear us recommend it so often. Tamarack's the next one, and we'll discuss that more on why tamarack's great for some other sites as well. But yeah, I'll let Dan kind of talk about the tree tubes and kind of what the overall planning was for the site.
I don't know, Bill, if you want to move your camera or not to catch what I'm saying here, but we'll just talk about this one. So this is a plantra ventilated tree tube. It comes with a fiberglass stake and a rubberized tie. So I don't have any stock in plantra. This isn't an infomercial for them. There's a whole bunch of different tree tube companies that make a great product, and we've had landowners who work with NRCS that have used a whole bunch of different brands of tree tubes to great success. The important thing is that you use a relatively high quality tube. I disfavor the roll-up ones because they're more management. You typically need to add some additional zip ties. These solid ones are less maintenance. They're also more expensive up front. The roll-up ones are typically quite a bit cheaper, but there's additional labor involved in those. So that's a trade-off that you're kind of assess your capacity and make that trade-off as you see fit. This one has a fiberglass stake. Actually, this one inside of the tube. It's about this is a 5-foot tree tube, and the stake's about 5 foot tall as well. These are very robust systems. I've seen these recycled multiple times on different trees. So you'll get through one like this, get it sufficiently above deer browse, and then have the ability to swap that tube onto a new seedling in a different location. So it's a little bit of an investment in kind of your property as well, instead of just a one-off kind of a thing.
Should we go taller?
So they do sell some that are 6 foot or like 64 inches, something like that. I think the 5-footers are typically adequate. It's not to say that going higher than that isn't a good thing. I just think that you probably can get away with those scenarios in Wisconsin where I've been on, or most properties I've been on. I think you can get away with a 5 foot without issue. I have done some shrub plantings, so I've seen nothing planted in this location that we can look at, but I have done some shrub plantings with 3-foot tubes, and those typically provide enough protection that, let's say a redwood or dogwood or something like that, that's able to build out a robust root system and then keep putting browse out. A lot of times, basically what you end up doing is just kind of feeding that to the deer at about 3 feet. Okay. But they're still alive, they're still growing, they're still provide some habitat, and they may get kind of big enough to be above deer. They just grow so much faster than the hardwoods that you can get away with some shorter trees.
Do you have to start with a smaller tube if you have only like a 3-foot tree or say 18-inch tree?
That you're planting?
Yeah.
The size planting?
Yeah.
So I don't think the size of the stock that you're planting makes any difference in the size of the tubes. They'll go up looking for light.
Okay.
The big thing that I like with these tubes and others designed like this, there's some ventilation in there. Mm-hmm. So when we started using tree tubes back in like the, let's say, 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of them were solid. They'd create a greenhouse effect. They'd keep those buds alive or undormant longer into the winter. Then you get an early frost in October and it'd kill, and you get pretty bad winter kill within the tree tubes. So in this climate where we sometimes get those early frosts, I think it's really important to have a ventilated tube. But in terms of the size compared to the size of the stock, I don't think that matters at all.
Okay, so you can put a 18-inch tree in there and put a 5-foot.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You could do. It's fairly rare to get plugs, but you could do plugs in hardwoods too, and I wouldn't have any issues with
Now,
that.
how far does he put that in the ground? Because I've always had problems with tubes with mice and moles.
So this
getting
one
in
is
the
just
wintertime.
right on the ground, just
Right on the
barely
ground?
barely screwed into the ground.
Okay.
Sometimes, so you can see there's a chemical application here in about a 2-foot circle around this tree, which is what I recommend, that you do some at least initial chemical site prep as well before you install that tree, just for competition control. And this site is very clean still. I believe we're 3 years after planting. Yeah, 3 years after planting, this is still fairly clean. Compared to the amount of grass I have here, competition compared to the amount of grass I have in the immediately adjacent area.
How tall was the tree when he planted?
I think they were 2-0.
Just the little ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So very good growth on these to be out of the ground or out of the tube already at this stage. You obviously this is a very small diameter tree. You obviously can't remove this tube yet, right? It's going to need another 3 to 5 years probably of having this tube around it in order to be robust enough to remove the tube, move somewhere else. And you saw when we walked in, and you'll see on the other sites where Ross has done some planting that's significantly older, that he still has these tubes on even though the trees are approaching 15 feet tall. So that's one way to handle that as well. Typically then you need to cut the tubes off because you won't be able to pull them up over the top of the tree. I want to talk a little bit about the design of this planting. Steve touched on the white pine and the oak planting in order to have the trainer trees for hardwood log production. This was a very common thing for us to do from the 90s to early 2000s, maybe even back in the 80s a little bit in the Conservation Reserve Program. We did a lot of, some of them were actually ash plantings, but some of them were also typically red oak as opposed to swamp white oak plantings, but this goal was the same. We're going to take this field, we're going to turn it into saw log production, and we're going to have these pine rows in between that are going to provide that lower branch shading, so we have these really clear logs for your first, like, say, two saw logs are going to be very, very clear. What ended up happening, because we didn't typically, the agencies didn't typically provide any funding for tree tubes, is that we planted all of these hardwoods, then we had these excessive deer numbers. Most of the hardwoods were victims of our friendly neighborhood tree munchers, and we ended up with basically a poorly stocked pine plantation instead of a mixed oak pine system. And by Ross taking basically that same concept that we know would work in some places where we had low deer pressure, it worked very, very well, and adding this browse protection, we think he's going to have a really, really good chance of success in getting to that point where the investment of these tree tubes up front is actually worth it when we get 50 plus years down the line and we start being able to think about harvesting some of that timber.
Can you repeat where you're putting in the white pine? What it's doing to the oaks?
Yeah, basically down the road, this is 30 years down the road, as these trees get taller, we want the oak trees to lose their lower limbs. You look behind you, right?
Okay.
Those trees don't have lower limbs
So
on them.
self-pruning themselves?
Self-pruning,
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
Exactly.
But you need to have that shade. If your only goal is wildlife, having a big open grown oak tree is meeting your needs perfectly. But if it's wildlife and solid production, then you want to have those, and you can achieve that multiple ways. And this is what Ross is doing by putting the white pine in.
He planted the white pine though too. It isn't natural regrowth.
I think there's a few of them in here that are natural regen because they don't quite look like the spacing is right. And there's definitely some balsam regen in here. And there's, if you look in the back, kind of behind the camera here, there's white pine regeneration that's significantly older on the edge of this cut. So there is definitely white pine regen in here, but the majority of it was planted.
Did he scarify it at all to get rid of the trash or to start the aspen growth or anything?
No.
He did mention when they went through here, when they logged in here, they did rough up their ground fairly well to get some, that would help get some seed in here. But I don't know if that was all intentional.
Yeah. To my knowledge, he did not do a separate scarification action here.
Okay.
The logging was
Part of the logging.
Yeah, sufficient.
But you had the logger flip the tops in different positions rather than just or not?
I'm not aware that there was anything
Not sure.
special about the logging job.
Okay.
I think just the way that the equipment that they were using, the time of year that they were doing it, did have some.
So they probably had a
some
track
effects.
machine then.
I don't know what they had. If I had to guess, I'd say it was probably Ponzi setup.
Okay.
Based on which logger did it, I'd say they were probably in here with the
Which could have had tracks over the top of the
Yeah.
rubber.
most likely.
Okay.
Knowing Ross, he might have even picked up the brush.
Sure you are, yeah.
There was an effort during the logging to do that, but it wasn't like a separate action though.
Okay.
So what's amazing here is just how the oaks are outgrowing the white pine right now. I think that's pretty cool to see how
That's
well Ross
impressive.
did this, and that's usually not the way it works. Usually the other way around. So.
Yeah, I think it's because of the tubes. I mean, they do accelerate,
Oh, for sure.
oak growth.
But you'll see it on his other sites too how well they're doing. So.
Will the ash regenerate at all?
Oh yeah,
So
it'll regenerate great. I mean, all that seed source is still there from last time. It'll get 3 inches and die again.
Oh, it will?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
Yep.
talk about that maybe a little bit more when we go down there with what we're kind of expecting for EAB. But when Steve mentioned deer browse before, I was hunting around a little bit behind in here. And in addition to some native bumblebees that are buzzing around through the blackberries here doing some pollinating, I did find a few ash seedlings. There's one immediately behind Steve there, right next to that white pine. And there is some browse, like this guy got browse last year, I believe there. And there's some browse on the blackberries too. So still significant deer pressure just in the immediate area.
I've always had deer pressure on the white pine. I'm surprised he doesn't have that.
He bud caps a lot of his white pine.
Oh, he does? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he's planning on doing that on this property, in this specific area, or not.
He's not doing it on these because he doesn't care about the white pine quality on this one because they're just nurse trees. So he doesn't care if it keeps a single stem or not because they're gonna,
So it's just stapling a piece of paper on the top.
yeah.
Yep.
I think they're gonna. Randy Cooper will cover that
Okay.
at that station.
Thank you.
Yep.
You had a
The
question?
question with black ash, I know one of the dangers is that it can possibly swamp out.
Yes.
When you cut it. Are there any indications that you're going to have that problem? I mean, that you know of that by visually looking at the stand before you decide to go in and do something as to whether you're going to have that kind of a problem?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. One thing I look at is if it has good drainage, if it's right along a stream corridor, that kind of stuff. Those sites I'm not worried about because what's going to dictate your water flow is the drainage, not the transpiration coming through the trees.
But you can see over there where
But-
there's cattails, there's no trees, right? So it must be a wetter area.
Yeah, this site is really undulating through here. It's really up and down, so there are pockets, and this site just doesn't drain even with before it didn't drain very well either. This site's not going to swamp out ever because he has this up and down through the whole site, so you have microsites. So when you're planting in a swamp, you're picking your microsites, which are your higher sites, your better sites. That's what you're trying to target. The next site will be a really good site to talk about that swamping out. If it's an ash stand, predominantly ash stand, it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to swamp out at this point in Marinette or counties where we're working here. That stand's dying one way or another, so by cutting them in strips or anything else, at this point you're not gaining anything. You would have if you'd done it years ago earlier, but at this point with where EAB is at, it's not going to make a difference. So this is a black ash stand behind us. It was predominantly black ash. It was harvested in January 2022. All the ash was cut and the balsam fir was cut. Any other trees in here were left, so any of the birch and elm and that, those all retained. Basswood, there's a couple oaks here as well. The ash trees were alive when they were cut, so then they all stump rotted back right away. Again, they're coming back. They actually can be somewhat helpful because they can help hold the site. They're still moving some water.
So
Yeah, there's a stump throat right there.
That's about a 5 to 6 inch diameter stump. You can see the vigorous resprouts on this, and how preferentially most of them have been browsed.
And we'll see a stump right up there when we leave and that, but deer love stump thrusts more because they're using the old root system. They're growing faster, so they like to eat vigorously growing stuff. It's more palatable for them, and they have really high mineral nutrients in these stump sprouts, so they're going to browse stump sprouts much more than a normal seedling. The advantage is they grow fast, but they get browsed really heavy. So here, these are all basically decimated by the deer the following winter after harvesting. So because of the high water, he had decided to do a fall replant with tamarack and black spruce seedlings. By the time the planting crew had come to visit, the competition was fairly high. So at that time, they suggested using a drone sprayer. So he delayed his planting, and the following year, he hired a drone sprayer to spray the site. They sprayed it, and it was ineffective. I'm not sure what herbicides they used, but that was an ineffective spraying.
I don't have a lot of details on that. We're not going to talk much about the herbicides or anything like that for this presentation. The issue there, I believe, was surfactant quality. And first time that drone operator had operated in a forestry setting. So that the spraying itself went very well. Ross did some additional activity during that winter to prepare for the drone spraying. So Steve mentioned that all of the non-ash species basically had been left. You can see there's quite a bit of open area behind us. When this was initially cut, there was significantly more residual trees. Ross came back in and dropped some of those residual trees in order to make the drone accessible. And so one of the things we want to highlight with this is that even though in this particular situation we had some issues with the chemical mix, the drone itself was a very effective delivery mechanism. So the issue is not with the drone, it was with the chemical surfactant combo that was used. And if you are looking to do something similar to this, working with your logger, having a drone operator that you've talked to, discussed what their capabilities are with this, and picking out kind of what you're going to do with those residual trees during your initial harvest is going to be an important part of setting the stage for that drone. Most of them don't have the ability to automatically identify that basswood and go around it efficiently in the field. They need to kind of have, they're set up for ag spraying. They have a square, nice box like a cornfield, and they're very efficient at transecting that. And so if you have a strip of trees like this that's left, and then those trees kind of outline the edge of the planting. So we have basically 1 or 2 trees in the middle of this that they need to manually dodge, and everything else can just get transected automatically by that drone. If there was, let's say, 15 residual trees out here, now maybe we're not actually able to use a drone anymore because there's too many hazards. So finding an operator before you set up the cut, and then making sure that your harvester or your logger is marking appropriately to set the stage for that drone is very important.
Yeah, and there are drones now that if you did have that 15 trees in here, if you have them pre-identified on the map, GPS on the map, and they recognize them, they'll spray within 10 feet. They'll keep a 10-foot buffer. But if they're out there and they're not pre-mapped and they run into it, then they have more issues at that point.
Do you have a list of recommended drone operators?
No, we don't maintain a list of recommended drone operators. I mean, there's ones that we've worked with here or there. I mean, I've very rarely have we worked with them yet, but it's such an emerging.
Or suggested list rather than recommended?
I
We
mean,
don't even have one in the ag, on the interstate side of things. We don't even have one in the ag
Google
space.
it then.
I would use the same method as you would if I was looking for drone operators.
Okay.
I've called a couple of them, and a lot of them are coming from the ag side of things and
Okay.
starting to put their fingers into the forestry side of things.
Okay.
The ones I've talked to, they are more expensive just based on the acreage that they apply it to. So if you have a group of neighbors that you're willing to do, or they want to do something like that too, the price comes down quite a bit.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's still kind of expensive to have a drone come in, from what I've been told.
Well, there's some that specialize in the worms. What are they called?
Oh, gypsy mouse.
Gypsy mouse. And they've been around in our area. I just wondered if you were using that same type of operator. I can imagine that they've
Some of
done
them
it.
are starting. The ones I've talked to are kind of
Okay.
dipping into that too.
Okay. Now, if you didn't spray, it looked like this.
This is probably relatively accurate.
So the tamarack wouldn't grow, and if you didn't spray at all.
Well, that's a good question, and on this site, I don't know the answer on this site in particular. But one thing I want to highlight today is discussing is when you evaluate competition for a seedling, of what is that competition? Because trees can grow through a lot of competition. Naturally, they do, right? It's usually when we have the unnatural competition of if we have cattails, most cattails around here are non-native cattails. Reed canary grass is one that grows thick. When you have really thick, dense, tall competition, that can be hard for trees. Grasses are generally worse than broadleaves. So if I have a site that's a lot of broadleaves, maybe some sedges, I may not spray that at all. And later on I'll talk about this old plant thing I did, and we didn't do any herbicide. Post or pre-herbicide on that one at all.
Okay.
So it's kind of understanding what is your competition and what does that tree need to get past it. So you gotta look at that close. You don't need to spray on every site by any
have
means.
one flagged over there. So is that a tamarack that's growing?
Oh, yep. This is a tamarack right here growing. Yep.
So
And
that
he's
one
doing just fine compared to the ones where in the area where we did do the site prep, and the one that in that area where we didn't do the site prep, the tamarack was doing fine. This was also a mixed black spruce tamarack planting, and part of the site prep concern here, black spruce grows significantly slower than tamarack. it's significantly more, I would say, affected by competition. And so that was part of the rationale here. If we were just doing tamarack, we might have just gone at a higher density, slammed in more tamarack, expected some mortality, and not gone to the expense of the site prep. Trying to get some of the black spruce was part of the rationale for that, particularly when you have a lot of sedge grass competition like Steve mentioned. Those small black spruce seedlings that grow slowly, they get grass on top of them in the winter. When you get snow load brings them onto them, and then they aren't able to come up through that, basically, is one of the issues. And so if you get a good chemical kill, you're able to mitigate that to some extent for the first couple years, get them to a point where they can handle the competition.
Yeah, I had a discussion with John Kotar a few years back.
Sure.
He's the lead on the habitat classification. And he mentioned that in the wild, you don't find tamarack associated with black ash. So he said you'll either find black ash or you'll find tamarack, but you won't find both. And and he didn't know why that was the case. And I don't, if there's been any more knowledge gained in regard to that, you know, is tamarack a good thing to plant in a black ash site, or not?
Straight black ash site, like black ash is like the best tree that could possibly grow there, and it's all going to die, right? So we're to some extent, if we're just working with straight black ash, which is not this site, right? There's, you can see there's, you know, Indian strips and bastard stuff behind us. There was quite a bit of microtopography in this site, and this is more diverse than just a straight black ash swamp. But if you're just looking at the hydrology and the pH that Steve was mentioned before of a straight black ash site, converting that to anything is going to be a little bit of a shift, right? So it's, I would say, to some extent, property to property dependent on how successful you're going to be with that, which is why we're seeing a lot of landowners choose to not replant those areas.
Now, is this a larch versus tamarack, or is that the same thing?
This was funded by NRCS. All of our programs require native species, so this is a tamarack or American larch. So
Okay.
larch typically refers to the European version of a tamarack.
Okay. So it's the same tree if you're ordering it.
No, it's
No.
not the same tree. You
Okay.
can purchase European larch. It's typically planted on more upland sites in America,
Okay.
and that is has a different scientific name, it's a different species than the American tamarack.
Yeah, if you see it called American larch, it's probably American tamarack.
Okay.
But because you'll see it as listed as both. And one thing with that competition we were talking before about why one reason why grass is so bad is exactly what Dan said, is that you can plant a tree in, you know, really thick grass competition and it'll look great the first year. The real test is that following year, and it's that thatch laying over in winter, burying that seed. Usually that's generally the demise of it. Is that's when it occurs. You get the heavy wet snow, lays all this grass down, flattens that little seedling. That's why, like, if tamarack can get up and grow fast that first year, they can often put enough growth that first year that when it lays down, they remain standing. Whereas the black spruce seedling is just going to be buried because its growth can be very, very minimal that first year.
Should we talk about black spruce a little bit more, or did you have somewhere else you wanted to go?
No, yeah, go on black spruce, yep.
So the black spruce planting out here was
We got 10 minutes. We got to be on this.
okay. 10 minutes. You got to be on the buggy. The black spruce planting out here was pretty unsuccessful. So there was two reasons for that. I talked to Ross about this a little bit. So this was a fall planting. I don't have any experience doing conifer plantings in the fall. Apparently there's those conifers that retain their needles can still do some cooking into the winter if the temps are high enough where they can be trying to do some photosynthesis. And by doing that fall planting, even though this is a wet site, they didn't have the opportunity to get any roots really established. And so there was some desiccation over the winter, basically, where they were still trying to photosynthesize. They were burning up their water reserves, and they didn't have any way to get anything else. And so that was one of the reasons we think that the black spruce survival out here was poor. The other reason was that the plan here was to do planting in the spring, and then I got delayed until a fall planting. Lining up contractors was a hassle. Getting delivery of seedlings was a hassle. We didn't have kind of our pick of what exactly sizes we were going to get. So the black spruce that were delivered were pretty large. And Steve has some seedlings as an example. We're going to talk a little bit about root pruning, but the importance of that and the reason we're going to cover that is that the black spruce were not appropriately root pruned by the contractor, and they were shoved into the ground with a dibble bar, which was not large enough to accommodate the root system. So there was some fairly excessive J rooting on a number of those, and then that combined with the desiccation issues over the winter led to a very unsuccessful amount of black spruce in this planting. So the lesson there, maybe your non-deciduous conifers would be more successful in the spring planting, and make sure that the root pruning is happening if you are ordering that larger stock.
Just a question, who planted this? I mean, Ross did
I'm not
plant
going
it.
to say that, especially with video on this. Ross hired a contractor.
Hired a contractor. Okay. I was going to say, Ross is a good man.
Yeah.
In his younger days, he might have. But
I'm sure Ross would have loved to plant this himself. And that does bring up, everybody's constrained by labor, that kind of thing. In an ideal world, there are some hummocks out here that are higher, some little microtopography that's higher. If labor wasn't a concern, we might have added some swamp white oak to this planting, maybe some other stuff. Not necessarily in this area that's fairly wet, but on the other side of that tree line there's an additional area of this that was, there was actually some decon work done over there for site prep as well, the winter before the planting. And so there may be some areas where we could have snuck some red maple in too. I don't know how well they would have done over the long haul, but just to try to add some more hardwood diversity in this, those obviously would have required tubes based on the ash browse and the discussion we had earlier. And so that would have been an exceptionally large amount of effort in order to be able to come out and tube something in a swamp compared to being able to tube something on a higher ground depth. So that's why we didn't go that way. We just stuck with browse-resistant conifer species basically. So that's kind of where we're at with this. And if you're looking at your property and you have the labor capacity to do something different, I encourage you to put in some hardwoods as well.
Yeah, and I got a few planting that like this are quite rare. We don't do these a lot. This is just a picture of we had a planting crew on Oklahoma County Forest, and basically, they had a crew of 10, 11 people. They're planting about 17,000 trees a day in a swamp setting like this. Spring plantings are always better than fall plantings if you can do it. If it's too wet, then you might be relegated to a fall planting, but spring planting is ideal when you can make it work. But yeah, and this is a cut over site just like this. I mean, there's no site prep, no herbicide. They just went through the slash, stuck in trees, did a really nice job. We're gonna talk about root pruning a little bit later when we get to the back to the trail there. So we'll cover that. Stock size, there's two strategies. You can plant like 1-year-old trees or smaller trees, cheaper, easier to plant, or you can go larger trees. And it's kind of knowing when one's the best bet for what choices. So far, what we've seen is you get good stock. If it's a young tree, it'll do really well. The areas where I think a larger seedling comes into play when you have that really dense competition and you need that height, or if you're in a river bottom scenario where you're going to have flooded waters and you need that tree to be above that water line, is where you might want to get those older trees. Yeah, a lot of these plantings generally we're going with Wisconsin DNR nursery trees, and we've had some really good success with some of those 1 and 2-year-old swamp white oaks and plantings. Have been just phenomenal growth with them. Last year when we did our planting, we ran out of trees at the nursery, and so we went. Iowa DNR actually had some spare trees, and they gave us some of the larger ones. They grow them a little bit taller than what we do, and they don't really have. Their success rate on our planting was lower, but I think if we get in an area we get that thick grass is where we might get those larger trees. Might be a better deal. But I really like having those trees that are native to this area, the genetic stock of where they're grown from. So that's what, if you buy trees, ask them where is this stock from. You want to get a northerly stock generally for those trees. Iowa's relatively close, not as good as it would be Wisconsin stock, but
Would direct seeding be an option in a site like this? And if so, where would you access?
I have really Wisconsin DNR does sell seed, so it depends on the availability of what they have available.
Because you could drone seed it.
I'm
right?
incredibly
Yeah.
interested in the possibility of doing that. However, we're just not there yet with what the technical details of that would look like. I think there's going to be some stuff in the next decade where we do some things that are very creative. On my end, with working with the agency I work with, we're not doing experimental stuff, right? We need to kind of have a method already established, and so I'm waiting on the Forest Service or University of Minnesota or Wisconsin DNR or something like that to pilot some of those studies and then give us a method that we can take
Get on it,
and
get
take
on
to the.
Yeah, I have no experience doing that, seeding like that. I've had people do acorn plants. I think those have been really successful. I think there's a lot of benefits to that, of just how many you can stock in per acre. But yeah, I haven't done any of the seeding stuff yet. But all right, so I kind of look at talk about root pruning and seedlings a little bit, because when you're trying to hand plant trees like this, it can take a lot of effort to do it well. And like Dan talked about, if these roots are J-rooted or shoved in a hole, that tree may look great for 5, 6, 7 years and then just be all of a sudden toast, and you're wondering why. It's just planting quality. Obviously, if you're doing it yourself, you can kind of control that. But if you're hiring someone to do it, you don't have much control over how they're going in the ground. So you really want to root prune well. These are ash trees, so they don't have the great big roots that oaks are going to have. But this is what you run into. When you get these trees, you're gonna get them like this, and that's just not a tree you can put in the ground. So a lot of these could just be a cull tree. You don't even put it in the ground.
Especially, I mean, most of these trees we're still planting with dibble bars, or a shovel that's gonna have a blade that's relatively the same width. And if you look at the comparison between a tree with a kicker root that comes off the side like this and a dibble bar like this, that's very, very difficult to get in the ground. I know a lot of you have probably more tree planting experience than I do in your lifetimes, and this is old hat. But if you're looking at just trying to get, do your first tree planting or use different size stock like Jim was mentioning earlier, particularly the larger oaks are really impossible to get in the ground with a dibble bar. And so you need to be set up on your tree planting, and the day you're there, you kind of need to have a plan going into that to set yourself up and your crew up for success.
I planted some white oak with a planter, and if we shoved it down, I mean, they really grew well, but they flooded out. After they were 6 feet tall, they flooded out.
Yeah, so this is, I'm going to say this is compared to a 1-year-old seedling. Generally, roots are going to be longer in that tree, but it's a lot easier to plant than, this would be like a 2 or 3-year-old, something like that. So yeah, this is a lot easier to plant. So a lot of these situations, especially oaks, a lot of times 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds are kind of your best bet. Significantly easier to plant, cheaper, and they do really well. Something like this, obviously, you won't need to prune, but a lot of 1-year-olds may need to prune, may not need to prune. Once they get 2-year-olds, you're pruning those roots if you want to do it right, for sure.
How do you prune them?
So basically,
so glad you asked, Jim. So we're right.
Don't tell us how to prune them. Show us how to prune them.
We did
Variety of tools.
Yeah, Andy knows all about root pruning. We had 80,000 trees going last spring, swamp white oak, and we root pruned all of them by hand using these snippers. And basically, I'm going to take this off. I need to make it plantable. And we tested it down to leaving about 6 inches, even though 8 inches to 9 inches probably going to be very plantable with a dibble bar. But you're still getting rid of those long laterals. You don't want them shoved. You're better off having those roots cut off and planted correctly than you are shoved in there.